Welcome back to another online lecture of macroeconomics. We've been talking about supply and demand. To this point, we actually have been talking about demand and supply separately. And now for all the fun, we're going to bring supply and demand together. So here we have prices of $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 per bushel. So this is prices of what? Prices of corn. So, and in the red here, we have the market demand for corn, right? So at $2 per bushel, collectively, all of the buyers in the market are willing and able to buy 11,000 bushels per week. Right? At a price higher, at $4 per bushel, remember there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So if price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. If price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. So if price increases from $2 to $4 per bushel, quantity demanded total buyers, right? Decrease in demand from decrease in quantity demanded. It's important to say that. Decrease in quantity demanded from 11,000 bushels to 4,000 bushels per week. So price up, quantity demanded down, price down, quantity demanded up. Well, what about on the supply side of this equation, right? All right, well, here we have the same prices, $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 per bushel, and the blue shows us the market supply of corn. So these are all the corn farmers, corn producers. Now remember, there's a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. If price goes up, quantity supplied increases. If price goes down, quantity supplied decreases. So there's a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. So for instance, at $3 per bushel, sellers are willing and able to make available for sale 7,000 bushels per week. If price were to increase to $5 per bushel, these collectively sellers would be willing and able to produce and sell 12,000 bushels per week. So price up, quantity supplied up, and vice versa. Now, here's the most important idea in this particular slide is that we have the interaction of buyers and sellers. Buyers are trying to maximize utility. Sellers are trying to maximize profit. So we have this what's called rationing function of prices. Rationing function of prices. And the way Adam Smith described it, as if led by an invisible hand. So there's no government telling us what the price or the quantity bought and sold should be. Right? Equilibrium is determined by the interaction of buyers and sellers, and lo and behold, we end up at equilibrium here at $3 per bushel and 7,000 bushels bought and sold. So there's our price and quantity relationship. Right? Now remember, it's important that we got to this point through the interactions of buyers and sellers, collectively acting in their own rational self-interest. Right? So buyers trying to maximize utility, sellers trying to maximize profit. And according to Adam Smith, and most economists would agree with this, right, rational self-interest, competitive forces tend to lead to the most efficient use of an economy's scarce resources. Right? Well, a couple important ideas here. Number one, at $3 per bushel, this does not mean every single solitary person went home with corn. There were buyers who were waiting for corn to drop below $3 per bushel, so they went home without corn. There were sellers who were waiting for the price to go above $3 per bushel, right? So those sellers simply didn't sell their corn, right? So buyers who are willing and able to make their purchases and interact at the market price, they will buy and sell. But if you're waiting for the price to decline as a buyer, you went home without any. If you're waiting for the price to increase as a seller, you might not have sold all of your corn, right? All right, another important idea is that equilibrium is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of the story, really. Right? It's a temporary resting place. So we use this idea of equilibrium and say, okay, now we understand what demand is. We understand what supply is. You can't have a market without buyers and sellers. We brought buyers and sellers together. Right? We brought buyers and sellers together here. Right? And what's going to happen is that now we're going to talk about what happens when something changes in markets. How does that change the equilibrium? How does that change the price and quantity relationship? Idea graphically. Right? So it's important whenever you write out your graphs, and I don't know if you're doing it on a computer or you're simply writing them out by hand, that you correctly relabel everything that you are exciting noise here, equilibrium, right? You correctly label everything that's on your graph, right? So price is on the vertical axis, quantity is on the horizontal axis. We have our downward sloping demand curve in red. Now you don't have to do different colors, but it does kind of help. Downward sloping demand curve showing us all of the market buyers of corn. Our upward sloping supply curve, all of the sellers of corn. Right, and we see equilibrium occurs at $3 per bushel, right, 7,000 bushels bought and sold. There's equilibrium. Right? Okay, what happens if the government intervenes and doesn't allow the market forces of supply and demand to dictate that price quantity relationship to bring us to equilibrium? In this case, we have what's called a price floor, right? Price floor. The government steps in the corn market and says corn cannot be sold below the price of $4 per bushel. Right? So the government is setting a price floor. Well, obviously, the price floor is going to assist sellers. All right, corn farmers would be happy, but what does that create? It creates a surplus. Why? All right, a surplus means this: quantity supplied is greater than or exceeds quantity demanded at the price. So at $4 per bushel, quantity supplied goes up a bit, right, from 7,000 to 10,000 bushels. So quantity supplied is quite handsome there. It's 10,000 bushels per week. But quantity demanded decreases at a higher price. So if you see that difference between the 10,000 quantity supplied and the 4,000 quantity demanded, that's our surplus of 6,000. Right? Now, there's two reasons why in the real world the government would actually institute such a policy. Here's the logic. The economic rationale or logic, according to the government, is that this would ensure a safe and adequate food supply for Americans if we're taking care of farmers. It would also, and that seems like a reasonable or a logical explanation. It also would ensure an adequate wage for farmers. So there'd be no incentive for farmers to get out of the farming business and sell their land off to as property development. Right? Now, this is important. We will reiterate this point later on. If the government intervenes in markets, there will be secondary economic effects, because buyers and sellers interaction, invisible hand, would have brought us to equilibrium at $3 per bushel and 7,000 bushels bought and sold. But here the government intervenes and say, okay, what are the secondary effects? Well, the immediate secondary effect is that buyers pay a higher price. Right? Buyers pay a higher price than they would have otherwise. You ask, why aren't buyers up in arms? Well, typically, we don't buy a heck of a lot of one agricultural product, so sort of the pain, right, the higher price is spread out amongst all of the buyers, where the gain is concentrated in the hands of the farmers. Right? So the secondary effects here is that, number one, higher price for buyers, and second is that more resources than would have been otherwise are allocated towards the production of corn, and this is probably inefficient when we talk about allocative inefficiency. Right? Now, a good real-life question might say, okay, well, where does that corn go? Where does that extra 6,000 bushels, that surplus, where does it go in the real world? Well, in real life, one of two things typically happens. The government either buys up that excess corn and actually gives it away as foreign direct aid to poorer countries, which actually sounds like a great thing, right? But here's another interesting idea. All right, so the government buys up the corn, the surplus, they give it away for free, foreign direct aid. That's going to be bad for poor farmers in other countries, because who is going to pay anything for corn if someone else is giving it to you for free? Right? So our foreign direct aid, our giving away of food items, might actually be bad for farmers in poor areas. Right? The other idea here is that the government could simply pay farmers not to grow. Right? So in other words, where does that surplus go? The government actually pays farmers not to grow that 6,000 bushels. Right? So in the next lecture, in the next slides, we're going to talk about not a government price floor, but a price ceiling, and we'll talk about shortages and not surpluses.